Public debates between presidential candidates have become a mainstay of American elections, though this wasn't always the case. Sometimes amusing and sometimes shocking, presidential debates have been full of key moments shaping the way the public perceives the candidates and the issues. 1858. Although the campaign was for the Illinois Senate, the 7 debates between Senators Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln were the first true mass media debates in U.S. politics, reaching nationwide audiences on the same day, thanks to new technologies like the telegraph. 1948. The radio debate between New York Governor Thomas Dewey and former Minnesota Governor Harold Stassen during the Republican primary was the first audio-recorded presidential debate. The topic was whether the Communist Party should be outlawed. 1960. In the first televised presidential debate, looks mattered. Vice President Richard Nixon, the election favorite who was nursing a knee injury, refused to wear stage makeup before the debate and sweated under the studio lights. On camera, he looked pale and ill, with a 5 o'clock shadow. By contrast, a tan Senator John F. Kennedy looked and sounded robust and energetic, giving him a slight advantage after the debate. 1976. During his debate with former Georgia Governor Jimmy Carter, President Gerald Ford memorably misspoke when he said,
"There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be."
1980. Shortly before a scheduled one-on-one Republican primary debate in New Hampshire with former Texas Representative George H.W. Bush, former California Governor Ronald Reagan invited other Republican candidates to participate. Bush refused to accept the change in participants, leading to a standoff that eventually ended with the other candidates walking off the stage. During the second presidential debate with President Jimmy Carter, Reagan, the Republican nominee, responded to Carter's lengthy criticism of his record with a lighthearted dismissal.
"There you go again."
That won over the audience. 1984. In his Democratic primary debate with Senator Gary Hart, former Vice President Walter Mondale used a famous advertising slogan, "Where's the beef?" to criticize the lack of specifics in Hart's platform. During the second presidential debate in the general election, President Ronald Reagan deftly turned a question about his advanced age into one about Mondale's youth and inexperience.
"I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience."
1988. In a discussion about the death penalty during the second presidential debate between Vice President George Bush and Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis's dispassionate response to a hypothetical scenario of his wife being raped and murdered harmed his campaign.
"Governor, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?"
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life.
During the only vice president debate between Republican Vice President Dan Quayle and Democratic Senator Lloyd Bentsen, Quayle compared himself to President John F. Kennedy. Bentsen delivered a withering retort.
"I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy."
1992. During the vice presidential debate, retired Admiral James Stockdale, the running mate of independent candidate Ross Perot, chose an unconventional way to introduce himself in his opening remarks. During the presidential debate, Perot coined a memorable phrase when warning of the consequences if the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, was signed. Meanwhile, George H.W. Bush alienated voters by conspicuously checking his watch. 2000. As Republican Texas Governor George W. Bush was speaking during the third presidential debate, Vice President Al Gore strode toward him, but Bush disarmed him with a quick nod. 2008. When Republican Senator John McCain criticized Democratic Senator Barack Obama during the first presidential debate for reckless foreign policy comments, Obama reminded McCain of his own past statements. 2012. During the Republican primary, Texas Governor Rick Perry began to list the 3 federal agencies he would eliminate as president, but forgot the third one. After former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney complained during the final presidential debate that the United States has fewer ships in the Navy than it did in 1916, President Barack Obama retorted,
You mentioned the Navy, for example, and that we have fewer ships than we did in 1916. Well, Governor, we also have fewer horses and bayonets.
Romney attempted to highlight his commitment to diversity initiatives with an awkward turn of phrase.
I went to a number of women's groups and said, can you help us find folks? And they brought us whole binders full of women.
2016. During the Republican primary, businessman Donald Trump assured viewers that neither his hands nor something else were small.
He referred to my hands. If they're small, something else must be small. I guarantee you there's no problem. I guarantee it.
During the general election, when Secretary of State Hillary Clinton accused Trump of being a puppet of Russia, he retorted, "No, you're the puppet."
Well, that's because he'd rather have a puppet as president of the United States.
No puppet.
And it's pretty clear.
You're the puppet.
In another town hall-style debate, Trump appeared to menacingly pace around Clinton and loom over her as she spoke, which she later admitted made her skin crawl. 2020. In a packed Democratic primary aired on the NBC network, Elizabeth Warren may have sunk Michael Bloomberg's campaign with an attack on his past sexist comments and a comparison to Donald Trump.
I'd like to talk about who we're running against. A billionaire who calls women fat broads and horse-faced lesbians. And no, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Mayor Bloomberg.
During a chaotic debate in the general election, Donald Trump pressed Joe Biden on whether he would pack the Supreme Court by increasing the number of justices. Biden responded to Trump's repeated interruptions with, "Will you shut up, man?"